When the house fell silent, I did not understand it at first. I thought it was just a quiet day, one of those days when nothing happens, one of those days you learn to accept as you grow older. I made myself a cup of tea. I held the cup with both hands, waiting for the warmth to reach my fingers. The steam rose slowly, then disappeared, just like the voices that once filled this house. The walls stood the same, the furniture was in its place. Nothing looked broken, and yet something was missing. I sat at the dining table alone. There were 4 chairs. Only one was used. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up, life moves forward, homes become quiet. That is what people say. But no one tells you how quiet feels when it finally arrives. I listened for sounds without realizing it. Footsteps, a door opening, a voice calling my name. Nothing came. I looked at my phone. No missed calls, no messages. The screen stayed dark. I told myself not to check again. I told myself not to wait. But waiting had already become a habit. I remembered when this house never slept, when laughter echoed through the halls, when small feet ran across the floor, when someone always needed something from me. Now, no one did. I carried my tea to the window and sat there. I watched people pass by, strangers living their own lives, families walking together, children holding their parents' hands. I wondered when my life had become so quiet. Not suddenly, not loudly, but slowly, so slowly that I did not notice it happening. I realized then that silence does not arrive in one moment. It grows, day by day, call by call that never comes. I remembered how my son used to call me every evening, not for long conversations, just a few words. Did you eat? Are you okay? I will come tomorrow. Those words once felt ordinary. Now they felt precious. I did not cry. I had learned not to. Tears felt heavy, and I was already tired. Instead, I sat there quietly, holding my cup, listening to the clock, feeling something I did not yet have a name for. That was the day I understood something important. Not all losses are loud. Some losses come quietly, and by the time you notice them, it is already too late. Before the house became quiet, it was full of life. Not perfect life, not easy life, but real life. I remember when my husband was still alive. He was a gentle man, not one who spoke loudly, but one whose presence made the house feel safe. We were not rich. We counted money carefully, but we laughed easily. That was enough for us. Our son was the center of our world. He filled the house with noise, questions, and dreams, sometimes too many dreams. When my husband passed away, everything changed. Not in one day, but slowly, like light fading at sunset. My son was still very young. He did not understand death. He only understood absence. He asked questions I could not answer. Why is Papa not coming back? Did I do something wrong? Will you leave too? I held him close and told him no. I promised him I would never leave. I did not know then how heavy that promise would become. From that day on, I became two people, a mother and a father. I learned how to be strong quietly. I learned how to smile when my heart was tired. I learned how to hide my fear so my child would feel safe. I worked wherever I could, sometimes from home, sometimes outside, whatever helped us survive. At night, when my son slept, I would sit beside his bed. I watched his chest rise and fall. That sound gave me peace. I prayed silently. I asked God to protect him. I asked God to give me strength. Years passed. My son grew taller. His voice changed. His questions became deeper. But one thing stayed the same. He always came to me. After school, he told me everything. Who made him laugh, who made him angry, what dreams he had. I listened, always. Sometimes I was tired, sometimes my head hurt, but I listened anyway, because I knew one day he might stop talking. I just did not know when. When he became a teenager, things changed a little. He wanted more freedom, more space. I gave it to him, but I stayed close. If he came home late, I stayed awake. If he was quiet, I noticed. If he was hurt, I felt it before he spoke. People used to tell me I was too involved, too attached, but they did not know our story. They did not know how many nights we survived together, how many fears we shared in silence. When he went to college, the house became quieter for the first time, but not empty. He still called, still came home, still needed me. I remember packing his food carefully, writing small notes he pretended not to read, smiling when he teased me for worrying too much. I thought this would last forever. Then one day he came home and said, "Ummi, I want to get married." I smiled. Of course I did. Inside, my heart felt something strange. Pride, fear, and a quiet sadness I did not understand yet. I told him I was happy, and I meant it. I helped with everything, the preparations, the guests, the prayers. On the day of his wedding, I watched him from the distance. He looked confident, grown, different. I told myself this was good, this was life. After the wedding, he moved out. That was expected, that was normal. At first, nothing felt wrong. He still called me, not as often, but enough. He still visited, still asked for advice. I adjusted. I told myself this was the new rhythm. But slowly something shifted. Calls became shorter, visits became planned, laughter became polite. I noticed things but chose not to speak. I did not want to be the difficult mother. I did not want to create problems. When I visited his home, I behaved carefully. I spoke softly. I smiled often. His wife was respectful, kind in her own way, but distant. I told myself not everyone shows love the same way. I told myself to be patient. I stopped calling as much. I did not want to interrupt. I did not want to feel unwanted. So I waited. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The house became quieter than ever before. I started cooking smaller meals. I stopped buying things he liked. I told myself there was no need. At night, I sat alone. The television played softly. I did not watch it. My phone stayed on the table, face up, silent. Sometimes I imagined it ringing. Sometimes I imagined his name on the screen. But imagination does not make sound. I told myself this was fine. This was adulthood. This was independence. But deep inside, something felt unfinished. I realized later that love does not disappear suddenly. It fades when it is not shared, when it is assumed instead of expressed. I had given my whole life without question, and now I was learning how to live with less presence, not less love, just less space in his life, and I did not know yet that this was only the beginning.
At first, the changes were so small that I doubted myself. I wondered if I was imagining things, if loneliness was making me sensitive. I used to wait for his calls in the evening, not sitting by the phone, just keeping it close. Sometimes the call came late, sometimes it did not come at all. I told myself he must be tired. When I did call him, I chose my time carefully, not too early, not too late. When he answered, his voice sounded rushed. "Ummi, I'm busy. Can I call later?" I always said yes. Later rarely came. I noticed how our conversations changed. He no longer asked how my day was. He no longer shared small details. The talks became short, practical, empty. I did not complain. I did not question him. I remembered how he used to tell me everything, even the smallest things. What he ate, who he met, what made him smile. Now, silence filled those spaces. When I visited his home, I felt like a guest, not unwelcome, just temporary. I sat where I was told, I spoke when spoken to, I smiled more than necessary. His wife was polite, she offered tea, she asked basic questions, but something felt distant, like a wall made of quiet rules I did not understand. My son stayed busy, his phone, his work, his life. Sometimes I watched him laugh with her. I was glad he was happy, truly, but I wondered where I fit now. Once I stayed a little longer than usual. I thought maybe he would notice. Maybe he would ask me to stay. He did not. When I stood up to leave, he said, "Take care, Ami." Those words used to feel warm. Now they felt formal. On the way home, my chest felt heavy. Not pain, just weight. I started noticing small things at home, dust collecting where no one walked, unused cups, empty rooms. I began talking less, even to myself. At night, I lay awake. I replayed old memories like they were stories from another life. I asked myself quiet questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something I should not have? I searched my words, my tone, my silence. I found nothing. Once I cooked his favorite meal, out of habit, out of hope. Halfway through, I stopped. There was no one to eat it. I put the food away. I did not cry, I just sat there. One evening, I finally called him without planning. The phone rang, then stopped. Later, a message came. "I'm busy, Ami. We'll talk later." Again, later never came. That night, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet understanding. I realized I was slowly disappearing from his daily life, not because he wanted to hurt me, but because he did not notice the loss. The hardest part wasn't the silence, it was feeling forgotten while still alive. I stopped expecting calls. I stopped checking the phone as often. But hope does not leave easily. It stays quietly, waiting. I continued visiting sometimes, bringing small gifts, asking gentle questions, but each visit felt shorter, each goodbye felt heavier. Once I overheard him say on the phone, "I'll handle it, don't worry about her." He did not mean harm, I knew that, but hearing myself reduced to her hurt more than I expected. That night I sat alone and realized something painful. Love can become invisible when it is always available. I had always been there, without conditions, without demands, and maybe that made it easy to forget. The house grew quieter, not empty yet, but close, and I felt something building inside me. Not a storm, just a slow ache. I did not know then that a moment was coming, a moment that would finally break the silence and change everything. The turning point did not come with shouting. It did not come with tears. It came quietly, like everything else. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was folding clothes when my phone buzzed. For a moment, my heart lifted, but it was not a call. It was a message. The message was not meant for me. I could tell right away. It read, "Don't worry about your mother. She will manage. We are busy right now." I read it once, then again. My hands started to shake, not from anger, from shock. I sat down slowly. The clothes slipped from my lap to the floor. I stared at the screen. I wondered if I had read it wrong, if my eyes were tired. But the words did not change. She will manage. Those words stayed with me.
They echoed in the quiet room. I thought about all the times I had managed. When I was young, when I was tired, when I was scared. I managed when his father died. I managed when money was short. I managed when I was sick and still showed up. I never told him I was managing. I never wanted him to worry. And now, managing had become an expectation, not a sacrifice. I did not reply. I did not call him. I placed the phone face down on the table. I sat there for a long time. The house felt different that day, heavier, colder. That evening, I did not cook. I ate a small piece of bread. I did not feel hungry. I went to bed early, but sleep did not come. I stared at the ceiling. I listened to the silence. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a hard question. Had I become invisible? I remembered the nights I stayed awake for him, the times I skipped meals so he could eat well, the days I smiled so he would not worry. I did not regret any of it, but I wondered when my presence had become optional. The next day, I visited his home. I did not call ahead. When he opened the door, he looked surprised. Not happy, just surprised. "Ummi," he said. "Yes," I replied softly. I was nearby. That was not true, but I did not want to explain. We sat in the living room. There was a distance between us, not physical, emotional. I wanted to speak, to ask him about the message, to tell him how it hurt, but the words stayed inside. He spoke about work, about being busy, about plans. I listened. At one point, I looked at him and realized something painful. He was no longer looking at me as someone he needed. He was looking at me as someone he respected. Respect is good, but it is not the same as closeness. When I stood up to leave, he said, "Take care, Ami." I smiled, the same smile I always used, but something inside me broke quietly. That night, I cried for the first time in months, not loudly, just enough to let the pain breathe. I cried for the boy who once held my hand. I cried for the woman I had become. I cried for the space that had grown between us. I realized then that love can be taken for granted without meaning to, that people do not always see what is always there. I also realized something else. I had been waiting for him to notice my absence, but I had never allowed myself to step back. That night, I made a decision, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I would stop waiting. I would stop reaching out first. I would give him the space he seemed to need, not to punish him, but to protect myself. The house became very quiet after that, but this time I noticed the silence, and I understood that this silence was teaching me something important. After I decided to step back, life felt strange at first. Not empty, just unfamiliar. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I placed it on the table and let it stay there, silent. The first few days were the hardest. Hope still knocked quietly in my chest, but I did not answer. I focused on small things instead, waking up early, making my bed slowly, watering the plants near the window. I began noticing parts of myself I had ignored for years, my tired hands, my quiet strength, my patience. I started visiting old friends, people who remembered me as more than just someone's mother. They listened. They laughed with me. Slowly, the house began to feel less heavy, still quiet, but not painful. Weeks passed. One evening, the phone rang. I did not rush to answer. I walked to it calmly. It was him. "Ami," he said. His voice sounded different, uncertain. "Yes," I replied gently. There was a pause. Then he said, I was thinking about you. I closed my eyes for a moment. I did not accuse him. I did not remind him of the silence. I'm fine, I said softly. How are you? That simple question seemed to surprise him. He spoke more that day, about work, about feeling tired, about feeling lost. For the first time in a long while, he listened too. He did not apologize, not yet, but something had shifted. After that, he called again, not every day, but more than before. When he visited, I did not rush to please him. I did not hover. I simply welcomed him. One afternoon, while we sat together quietly, he said, "Ami, you don't call as much anymore." I looked at him and smiled gently. "I didn't want to disturb you," I said. He looked down. He nodded slowly. That was when I knew. He had noticed the silence. Not all realizations come with words. Some come with awareness. Over time, our bond found a new shape. Not the same as before, but more honest. I learned something important in that quiet season. Love does not mean losing yourself. It does not mean disappearing. Love also means knowing to step back, when to protect your heart, when to let others feel your absence. The house is still quiet now, but it no longer hurts, because I have learned how to fill the silence with peace. The house is still quiet most days, but now the silence feels different. It no longer feels like rejection. It feels like space. I sit by the window in the mornings with my tea. The sunlight comes in softly. The world outside moves on. Sometimes my son calls. Sometimes he visits. Sometimes he is busy, and that is okay. I no longer measure my worth by how often the phone rings. I no longer wait with my heart held tight. I let life come as it is. I have learned that love changes shape. It does not disappear. It grows quieter, deeper, more mature. I also learned something about myself. I am more than just a mother who waits. I am a woman who lived, loved, and survived. When my house fell silent, I thought I had lost everything. But in that silence, I found myself again. I found peace. I found strength. I found dignity. My son did not mean to hurt me. He was learning how to live his own life, just like I once did. And I forgive him. Not because he asked, but because love does not keep records. If you are listening to this and your house feels quiet, if you feel forgotten, if the phone does not ring anymore, know this: silence does not mean you are unloved. Sometimes it means life is changing. Do not disappear to be loved. Do not shrink to be remembered. Love yourself gently. Hold your memories with kindness, and let go without bitterness, because the heart that gave love freely will never truly be empty. And even when the house falls silent, your life still has a voice.